Oh, I'm just kidding. Hi, I'm Alli. I come from Iceland. I'm a senior technical producer and I work for CCP Games out of Iceland. I joined CCP in 2001. I've been working there for 9 years now. That means I've been working on all of our EVE products to date, all of the expansions, and I've also contributed to all of the current products that we have in development. And today I'm going to talk about global large-scale agile game development. So, 13 years ago, our founder, Reynir Harðarson, had an idea about spaceships. And they would be flown by hundreds of thousands of real people all over the internet in the same universe. And these people would pay us monthly subscriptions to fly around in them. And he was asking merely $5 million to create this project of his in a country that had 300,000 inhabitants and the predominant industry was fishing at the time. That sounds a bit crazy. And looking back, Reynir was found quoted, venturing on a project so massive in scope, so unprecedented, and unproven in so many ways is only done by either madmen or idiots. We will probably be both, Reynir Harðarson. Now, CCP has come a long way since then. We currently have 4 offices in 3 continents. We are headquartered in Iceland with 240 employees at the pier in Reykjavik. And I have a meeting. This is my meeting. And we have 150 employees right here in the US of A in our Atlanta-based office. We have 80 employees in Shanghai in China, and our most recent addition is our UK studio in Newcastle, where we employ 13 people. So we're closing up on 500 people rapidly, and we expect to be well on our way to 700 by the end of this year. So our company is a cultural melting pot. We have people from over 20 nationalities, and they speak more than 30 languages. Now, to most of you, CCP is synonymous with EVE Online. EVE Online is our main product. It's been out since 2003. But CCP is no longer a one-trick pony. Last year at GTC Europe, our CEO, Hilmar Veigar, presented our upcoming FPS RTS shooter game for consoles that would hook directly into our current EVE Online MMO. This is called Dust 514 and creates one world, one universe. Now, just to give a little bit of context and show you how that differs from our current EVE-based products, I'm going to show just a small trailer from that. Yeah, so this is a genre-bending game that is going to be pushing the technological boundaries even further for CCP. But I did not come here to show fancy trailers or glitchy graphics. I came here to talk about global agile development. So let's take a look at the globe. Now, we have been, or are currently, developing EVE Online from 3 of our studios. In our headquarters in Reykjavik, in Atlanta, and in Shanghai in China. Dust 514 is primarily being developed in Shanghai, but it's also being developed in our Newcastle studio in the UK. But wait, there's more. We also have an unannounced upcoming next-generation massively multiplayer online role-playing game being developed primarily in Atlanta, but also being developed in Reykjavik in Iceland. So we have 3 ongoing products, all in the different phases of development, being done in all of our 4 locations. Well, originally there was just EVE, and EVE was released in the year 2003. Development of EVE started in 1999 and was ramped up in the year 2000. The methodology we used for EVE Online is an iterative incremental approach called stage delivery plans. So it is iterative and incremental, like so many of our current Agile and Scrum processes, but those iterations were full product life cycles. Each life cycle would have upfront system requirements, game design, implementation, test phases, and then delivery of some sort internally with marketing material to support that release, maybe websites, user documentations, and such. But still an iterative and incremental approach. And EVE was done in 6 of these stage deliveries, up until it was released in 2003. Now, after 2003, we went out directly to do expansions for EVE Online. And those expansions would be a continuation of that exact same process, which at the time we just referred to as the EVE development process, where we would do upfront requirements, game design, implementation, and then do QA and debugging at the end, and then release to our customers. We started in 2003 with 1 expansion, another one in 2004, but by the year 2005, we were up to doing 2 expansions every year, and we have done so ever since. But in the year 2008, our home country of Iceland had a big economical meltdown, and we had people rioting in the streets. And at that point in time, the current subscriber growth of EVE Online was not sustaining our future growth plans and our business plans. So there was a lot of uncertainty, and we didn't know exactly how the future of our company and the future of all of our products was going to unfold. So we had to do something different. We had to change how we make EVE, and we had to change how we approach development and product development. So in the fall of 2008, our senior producer for EVE Online, Torri Frans Ólafsson, came on stage at FanFest and introduced our next expansion. That expansion was EVE Online Apocrypha. Now, EVE Online Apocrypha was an all-hands effort for CCP. We took teams from our then current development efforts, both in Atlanta and in Shanghai, and along with all of the teams in Reykjavik, put them on creating Apocrypha. We had 120 developers working from 3 offices in 3 continents to create this biggest expansion of EVE to date. But not only that. Torri Frans introduced this expansion to be released in March 2009, which was a shorter development time than any other previous expansion to EVE. At that point in time, we had been using Agile and Scrum at CCP for about a year and a half. We were using Scrum in our core technology platform efforts. We were using it in our then recently started next generation MMO project. We had been using Scrum in pilot projects for EVE Online and in very specific parts of the current development for EVE Online. So we had gathered some experience, and at that point in time, we had the courage to move the entire EVE production process over to Scrum and Agile. But we also found at that time that this is something that we needed to be able to manage the project that we were going to roll out in 3 continents from all of our offices. So essentially, we took the then current EVE process and flipped it completely upside down and into Scrum. Now, to do that required a lot of organizational change, obviously. So we had our Senior producer and lead game designer become what we call product managers. Now, these product managers would have a vision for their product at hand, in this case an expansion for Eve, a specific theme for it, and they would present a feature set for the expansion. Now, with a series of product owners, and it's only because of lack of real estate on this slide that we can't not show all of the 13 teams that take part in Apocrypha, they would take ownership over specific parts of the backlog. So a product owner would own this subset here, and this subset here, and so on and so forth. And together, these teams would mold and define and then build and verify each segment of the product. Now, these teams were obviously supported by Scrum Masters, and those Scrum Masters from all three offices formed a Scrum of Scrums, which would meet daily and deal with any problems that we were having in rolling out Scrum globally at the time, and also ensuring the progress and removing impediments for the teams and for each other. In addition to that, we institutionalized something called an Agile Transitioning Group. And the Agile Transitioning Group was responsible for making the organizational changes that were needed to roll out Scrum at such a big scale. So this was quite a powerhouse. We did, and we still have, the same group, which comprised of the CEO, the executive producer of CCP, and the VP of engineering. So these are people, and along, of course, with myself, that are capable of doing organizational changes when they are needed. So if we have teams working in this model, and they have an impediment, they of course try to solve that within their team, with the help of their Scrum Master. And if they cannot, the Scrum Master can then take that up to the Scrum of Scrums, and the collective Scrum Masters from all three offices would then try to solve that problem. Now, if it's something that is constantly slowing the teams down, or something that is just fundamentally wrong with how we approach Agile and Scrum, and such that we needed to do an organizational change, they then have a direct escalation path to this Agile transitioning team that then can make those organizational changes happen. And all problems would just go away. But of course that is not reality. But it sets up for all problems to go away. Now, since then, this is a model that we have adopted in all of our development efforts. In Eve, in Dust 514, and in our upcoming MMO project. And just about anything that we do with Agile and Scrum. And so the cornerstone of that is doing it in the context of shorter and more frequent releases. Each release we do is usually about 4 to 5 sprints, and then followed by a hardening sprint. Now, this hardening sprint is not for feature development. It is to polish and refine the stuff that we already implemented. And having these smaller, more frequent releases helps team with having clear and concise focus for the release goals at hand. And it gives them the opportunity to define, build, and verify the features and or components that they're working with. Now, the output of these releases are then fairly polished, full vertical slices of the product, adding a clear value or benefit after the release. And in the case of Eve, of course, this is a clear benefit because it goes to our customers directly. Now, so to do these shorter, more frequent releases, we do a lot of release planning. Release planning happens fairly frequently in all of these products, every 3 months on average. And release planning enables teams to have focus on what it is that they're currently working on in their release, and have full commitment on what they are working on in their current sprint. But also gives them the oversight of knowing what is on the horizon from the product roadmap. Now, having a product roadmap in a large-scale Scrum or Agile project, especially one that is being developed globally, is hugely important. And the product roadmap needs to be fairly visible, because these things change a lot, and everybody on the team needs to be aware and have oversight on where this product is going. But creating a product roadmap can be tricky when we have a global development effort. So what we do is that we get subject matter experts, producers, and specialists to come together and map out what it is that we want to be taking the product on into the future. So we put out big ticket items, high-level features on the product backbone, and map them over a series of releases in a product roadmap type workshop event. And these are images from a recent event. This is for an upcoming development effort that will have both component teams and feature teams from offices both in Reykjavik and Atlanta. And you can see by the color codes how it is kind of mapped to different types of teams rather than specific teams. And at the end product, after much debate and estimation and guesstimating, is a product roadmap that we can move forward on. Now, this product roadmap will, of course, change as more knowledge is gathered, and that's just normal. So we need to keep our product roadmaps alive and visible. But also to do release planning, we need to have a release plan. And the release plan is, as you might have guessed, a series of releases on a calendar. And it can be on our kind of traditional Georgian calendar that goes from month to month to month, or like in this example, on the Chinese year calendar. We recently started a release schedule in our Dust project that has 4 consecutive releases, each of them being 4 sprints and a hardening sprint, starting at the Year of the Tiger, which was quite recently, and ending by before the Year of the Rabbit. And so each sprint, each release looks a lot like this. Of course, in reality, it isn't really so streamlined. Here is, for example, the release plan for Eve Apocrypha in 2008. And as you can see there, we did 5 sprints and then a hardening sprint, but we were hit by Christmas. Now, that's quite unfortunate for teams that want to develop software to have kind of big breaks. So we came back after Christmas and did a re-release plan for the remaining 3 sprints to kind of fine-tune things. And after the hardening sprint in March, we released Eve Apocrypha on time on March 9th, 2009. And here's another example on how public holidays kind of interfere with release plans. This is our current release for Eve Online Tyrannus. We are currently in sprint 2, and we will then be hit by Easter, have our sprint 4, and then all go off to Mexico, and then come back and do our hardening sprint, and then release it hopefully on time, if we are not too hungover from Mexico, in late May. But that's the release plan, and that's what we strive for when we do release planning. Now, but what is release planning? When we have a series of product owners working collectively on creating a product, and they've taken ownership of that segment of the backlog, they are then left to their devices on working with the teams to define what that feature is delivering. And here's another example. This is again from our EVE Online Tyrannus expansion that's coming out this May. And you can see there's a major feature taken from the product roadmap, planetary interaction, something that has been put on the top of the priority list by the product managers. It has been defined in some detail, but it's then passed on to the product owner and to the team to further its vision and to map out all of the stories that are entailed into finishing that. So they will then break those features up to sub-features, and those sub-features up into stories. And the stories are then very well defined. The teams do estimates on them, and they work on acceptance criteria, and so on and so such. The stories are then the currency that we use for release planning. So release planning is essentially just mapping out stories to a series of sprints. It's not really that simple. We need to ensure that we can deliver on time. So we have fixed date delivery schedules. And to ensure feature breadth in these fixed date delivery schedules, we need to do prioritization on these stories. And what we do is we use Moscow analysis. The product owners will work with the teams to analyze the features that they're working on and prioritize them based on that. So the must-have functionality is the functionality that we have to have what we call a minimal marketable feature, or the minimal usable subset of the feature. If we don't have that, we don't have enough feature breadth for the feature to make sense, and we could just as well not do that. And so at the next level, we identify stories that should have stories. Now, these are stories that we should get to, but it's not the end of the world if we don't. We plan to have them in, but we know that, as we go along, things will change. We will have emergent work, and we might not get to them. The could-have stories are then nice-to-have stories, kind of whistles and bells and extra small little features that are going to make the experience even greater, or some sort of polish. And then most importantly, to clearly define what it is that we won't have. What is it that is not in scope for this release? And clearly point that out for the get-go so that we have focus on doing what it is that we're doing. So the product owners and the teams will then map out these features similarly to how we mapped out the product roadmap, aligning the features and the sub-features on walls and all the stories associated with them, and then just carve out lines and clearly identify what is the must-have functionality and what is the should-have functionality and what is the could-have functionality. At this point, the won't-have functionality is not even up there because it's completely out of scope for this release. And that is then mapped on to these sprint papers at release planning. But once we get to release planning, there's a lot of knowledge already gathered. We have defined the stories. They have probably been estimated by the teams. People have worked on acceptance criteria. So there's a lot to do, to put them on these papers. But that's not what release planning is all about. We do release planning simultaneously for all teams on each product. And that means over borders, over countries, and maybe sometimes over 15 time zones if we have all offices working on the same release. The purpose of that is to identify the interdependencies between the teams. Because we are working with teams of teams, maybe up to 10 teams or more on a product, interdependencies are something that we cannot go without. Teams will always be dependent on other teams. So the most effort of release planning goes into identifying those interdependencies and then planning accordingly. When one team member comes up to another team and says, can we have this at this specific time, a dialogue happens and they have to shift their priorities maybe. And we need to be able to do that then simultaneously on all 3 countries. And as an example, for Apocrypha, where we had Shanghai, Atlanta, and Reykjavik, we would start in the morning with the Shanghai office, collaborating with the teams in Reykjavik, and then as the day progressed, the Atlanteans would wake up and we would continue our release planning with them. Now, by that time, it's night in Shanghai, so that doesn't work for us. So we had to fly 2 guys over from Shanghai to take part of the release plan and follow their release plan throughout the day. And so at that point in time, teams are working on just defining these things, putting stories up into sprints, and doing last-minute estimations if needed. And at the end of our release planning day, every team will then present how their release is going to pan out to all of the other teams. And it kind of looks something like this. And you can see that at the far end we had this big video wall which we would project teams in from other offices over high-definition video conferencing. So at this point in time, for all of the products, we will then have a release plan. Well, that means that we can just go ahead and start working on implementing whatever it is that we're working on. Now, all of the teams work within a product on the exact same cadence. That means that they start their sprints at the exact same day and they finish their sprints at the exact same day. And in most of our products, we do 2-week sprints. We are currently experimenting with 3-week sprints for EVE Online. But all of the teams are tightly integrated. They're all checking into the same branch, and everything is fully integrated all the time. And at the end of the sprint, we have a fully integrated player pool increment of our massively multiplayer game. Now that means 1 server, 1 client, 1 build. And that is what we use as a measure of progress. Working software. But to demonstrate that globally, again, over different time zones, we need to implement some infrastructure. So we have put into place the ability to do sprint review from office to office. And we can put up screens in high definition that show a product and the people that are presenting it and the presenters at the same time. Now at scale, this becomes big if you have multiples of teams working on the same product. And this picture was taken this last Wednesday in Iceland, where a portion of the EVE team is sprint reviewing their second sprint in Taranis. Same day, last Wednesday in Atlanta, this picture was taken where the team there is sprint reviewing their product. And so all of the teams will go through a sprint review and present their working software. Now this, of course, requires some infrastructure. We have the ability to do full motion video games over high definition video conferencing at 30 frames per second. We do that over dedicated MPLS network lines. So we have up to 20 megabytes of dedicated lines between the offices to do this. And it allows us, like I said before, to have both the content, the video game running, and the presenter presenting it over those networks. But in addition to that, once the audio and video signal comes into each office, that is then segmented out and streamed locally on all offices. So everybody can open up a Windows Media Player on their local computer and get a live stream of the current sprint review that is ongoing from anywhere in the organization. Even the chef can be watching what's going on in development in Shanghai while she's cooking breakfast. Or a remote worker, maybe a community representative that needs to keep tabs on what is going on in EVE, can log into VPN and open up a browser and see a sprint review. And if you got a Nexus 1, you could go on an airplane, and which is GoGo Internet enabled, VPN in from there, open your phone, and watch a sprint review if you were so inclined. I'm looking forward to trying that one day. And then once the releases progress, all of the teams are following their burn downs. They report all of their burn downs immediately after each sprint, make adjustments to their plans if needed. As you can see there, in those specifics there, when changes are made to the release plans, things go out, things go in, such as that. The aggregated plan is then sent out in a newsletter to the entire company, also adding more kind of transparency to what is going on within the product development, accessible to everybody with links to the recordings of the sprint reviews if you missed them, and with small tidbits of information about what is going on in the product. Now, by having these empowered teams to take ownership of the segment of the product that they're working on, and having them have the ability to self-organize and self-manage around that, and having them do the release planning where they're self-providing the estimates, maybe self-articulating the stories, and adding the acceptance criteria. And doing that in the context of shorter and more frequent releases has proven to be somewhat successful for us. But we also need to have the tools available and the infrastructure available that scales. And this also proved to be successful for us in the marketplace. So in 2008, when subscriber growth in EVE Online was somewhat unknown for our future, and we had people rioting in the streets, and we didn't know exactly what was going on, we are now in a much better place, and we have a much greater comfort zone. These expansions that came out in 2009, EVE Online and Apocrypha, and EVE Online Dominion, have bumped our subscription numbers up quite significantly. And after Apocrypha, we had a PCU record, or peak concurrent users. That's number of users logged into a single universe, all playing the same game in one single shard. 53,850. Now that record was only to be smashed by Dominion in January of this year, where we had 56,817 people playing in the same universe at the same time. And we also did quite well in the reviews. We got Game of the Year awards from 3 fairly prestigious publications. And for a game that's 7 years old, to receive Best MMO Game of the Year in 2009 is quite impressive, even though I say so myself. But that is something that our increased focus on development has brought to us. And focus is super important, to have clear focus on what we are doing at every single time. In Apocrypha, we had company-wide focus. We put many teams from all offices, and everybody was just doing EVE Online Apocrypha. And that worked great. But as soon as Apocrypha was over and the teams from Shanghai went back to working on whatever they were working on before, and the teams of Atlanta went back to working on what they were doing there, the focus kind of shifted. And we saw a lot of turbulence in the development for EVE Online. So we have to reinforce that focus immensely, and making sure that focus is kept. Because focus is one of the many times forgotten Scrum values. And those are commitment, having teams that are fully committed and empowered to work on whatever it is that they're doing at the time. Working in a transparent environment that promotes openness. And, of course, focus and respect, where people are respected and trusted. When we are building teams around motivated individuals, giving them the tools that they need and trust them to get the job done. And, of course, we need to have this fearless courage that drives us to move forward on technological improvements and breaking boundaries. And continuous improvement is also extremely important moving forward. We found that in everything we do. And now, luckily for us, continuous improvement is built into the Scrum process. That means that after each sprint, all teams must do a retrospective. They must inspect and adapt and then move forward, make changes to their process and or environment and such. But in our large-scale implementation, we need to do much more continuous improvement. We need to really practice Kaizen. And we do that by having the Scrum of Scrums, continually trying to figure out how we can further the Scrum process within that product. And we have Scrum Masters come together after maybe every sprint or every other sprint, do retrospectives, and find out what we can do better. And have the product owners as well come together and do product owner-specific retrospectives. And then after every release, we'll do a release-wide retrospective or a post-mortem. And trying to figure out ways how we can continuously improve on what it is that we're doing. And of course, we have the Agile Transitioning Group who constantly meets and tries to figure out ways to further agility throughout the entire organization. But as you all know, if you tried to use Scrum, it isn't all bed and roses. This has certainly not been smooth sailing for us. We've had many problems. The first one we encountered was maintaining architectural integrity. Now, Agile promotes emergent architecture. But what happens when you have all of a sudden 8, 6, 10, maybe 12 teams, all emerging architecture all over the place? Well, we found that out the hard way. In EVE Online Apocrypha, we had to cut an entire feature from our release because we did not have cohesive architecture. And since then, the role of the technical director within our development has become much more important. We have included the technical directorship to be as part of the product management group, creating this holy trinity of game design, production, and engineering. And we also conduct peer reviews within teams and cross-team reviews. So we have teams check up on the implementations of other teams and overlook architectural integrity. Yeah, and art and asset creation. I'm sure you've heard this many times before about art and Scrum, or creating content and Scrum, levels, missions, dungeons, in game design. Getting art assets and levels to a state of done in a sprint has varied results. That's just how it is. And if you add outsourcing into the mix, you might end up with a dependency trail from here to Timbuktu, completely disempowering any team to have any control over what it is that they're doing. Now, we've been testing the waters a bit with lean production techniques, such as using Kanban pull systems and such. And lean production shares a lot of the same values and principles from as Agile and Scrum do. So, for instance, the two pillars of lean are respect for people and continuous improvement. So lean production and methods and Scrum can easily coexist. And then there's game design. With multiple large intertwined game systems, it's very unlikely to get a good design by piecemealing it together, small bits at a time. So game design is, in essence, iteration. And we need to explore multiple options ahead of implementation. So what we've come up with is a game design process. The game design process is a framework that allows us to focus on early iteration. It has a lot of people taking part in it, so it has mass participation. It gives ownership of the design to the people that are working with it, and we take a lot of kind of the lean thinking and lean practices into place there. Now, explaining this game design process in much detail would take a longer presentation than the one I'm doing right here. But my coworker, the Swede, who's sitting right there, he has prepared a lot of documentation on this, and we are hoping to be able to present how we've established this game design process and made it work in our kind of release-driven product development using Agile and Scrum. And we're hoping to be able to present that at a later GDC if we have the opportunity. And then there's legacy code. EVE Online is based on code. A lot of it is older than 10 years old. And if you saw Berglind's presentation here this morning on how to maintain this monstrous code base and came out of it, alive and with your head on, I salute you. But legacy code with test that doesn't have any test harnesses can severely affect velocity. It is so often that we have teams working on something in a product, oblivious about what it is that they broke somewhere else in the product. And we need to add as many test harnesses to our code base as we can. And implementing continuous integration, some sort of a build verification system that runs a suite of tests is important. And we are striving to add more and more automation to our tests. Of course, well, I shouldn't say of course, but I don't necessarily see us adding 100% automated test coverage to a 10-year-old code base, but we're surely going to try to reinforce it with as many test harnesses as we can. Because this bites us in the ass over and over and over again. And then there's planning, Agile planning. Now there's a myth, and you've heard this many times before, that Agile doesn't do any planning. Well, in fact, Agile probably does more planning. It just doesn't do all of the planning up front. So every team will walk into a daily scrum, and then they're planning. They're planning on what they're going to do for that day. And every 2 weeks they'll do a sprint plan, and they will commit to work on for those 2 weeks. And then we do release planning, as we've illustrated before. And we plan these product roadmaps. Do that every 6 months, maybe 9 months. But always keep them updated and plan them all over again. And then we have our portfolio of 3 products. And we need to do portfolio planning. And that is all driven by the business strategies of CCP. Now, under the vision of creating virtual worlds that are more meaningful than real life, CCP has a lot of strategies, a lot of different strategies. Some of them include maintaining the growth of EVE Online by creating expansions every 2 years, having a console strategy, having a very ambitious core technology strategy in which we are creating a core technology platform that is going to fundamentally implement all of our current and future games. And so it is these strategies that drive the portfolio and the vision of our entire development organization, accompanied by the architectural runway and the investment teams that we put into our portfolio and how we plan out our portfolio in terms of resources. Now, each product driven by the product manager and the roadmap, the product roadmap, and the vision for that product will drive through these releases with the release management team. The release management team are usually software managers or QA managers or some sort of support people that help with rolling out these releases. So we will have big ticket features being released to our customers, but we also need to ensure that we are maintaining and advancing our architectural runway, because our Scrum teams will not have more velocity than the architectural runway will allow them. So we need to assure that they can keep working. So we need to take on these architectural runway tasks in conjunction with our feature development. Now, this of course becomes an eternal struggle between our creative leadership and our production leadership and our engineering leadership. But this is a must-do. We must enhance our architectural runway. And then through release planning, we can take on multiples of teams and drive through these releases, sprint after sprint, release after release. Always on the same cadence, 4 sprints and a hardening sprint. And our products on these releases are all relatively recently release planned. And that means around May they will all go from their release to their next release. And you can see on this release cadence that these products are staggered but relatively aligned. And it's that alignment that gives us this company-wide agility. It gives us the opportunity to take teams from one product and move it over to another product. Similarly to what we did in Apocrypha, when we put everybody just working on Eve Apocrypha, but also similarly to what we did 2 months ago, when we had a part of our core technology group move from one product to another. And this is what we will continue doing as we add more teams and add more resources to our products. But what's important here is to maintain cohesive teams, allowing teams to work together over multiple releases, because it's only then when you get the true benefit of Scrum, creating these relatively consolidated units that will work fairly well together. Now, this paradigm is something that we've dubbed Othello planning, or for the lack of a better word, reversey planning, but it's with teams like these, teams like the core interior team of Reykjavik, or the team Phoenix from Atlanta, teams that have been working together for over 2 or 3 releases, or team Raggy Dolls from Reykjavik, or team Flow from Shanghai, or even this team here, the Sleeper Cell team in Reykjavik. It is teams like these that day after day take on the war on the impossible at CCP. At CCP, united, we are strong. Thank you very much. Now, we do have some time for questions if you want to talk about it. And I'm going to give an Eon magazine to the first question taker.
First of all, thank you for your inspiring speech on your Agile practice for geographically distributed team. And I have 2 questions. What was the resistance you faced in transition, and who was the change agent for that?
So the first question was again,
what was resistances you face in transition stage from Eve to Agile?
So what were the resistance?
Yeah.
Okay. So, like I said before, we had been working on Scrum at CCP before. We had been working on it in pilot projects, and we kind of knew what it was, and it had been a kind of bottom-up approach to rolling out Scrum. But we had very strong top-down approach as well. This, at that time, was hugely supported by the upper management, believe it or not. So, like I said, we had the Agile transitioning group with the CEO in it, and he just wanted to go Agile. And the executive producer and the VP of engineering. The most resistance was from the kind of middle management, because middle management will always just go with the status quo. That's where the most resistance was made. But over time, they have come to learn more about Scrum and Agile, and the resistance has kind of dropped a little bit.
How about engineer side, like a unit test?
How about
the engineer side resistance on unit test peer reviews?
So the question is, how about engineering resistance to unit test and kind of Agile practices, test-driven development and stuff like that? Okay, so for the engineers, it was just a lot of confusion at first, because we did not go ahead and say, you have to start writing code by doing test-driven development and unit tests and stuff like that. In fact, we are not doing unit tests at all in Eve today. We are only doing that in our upcoming MMO project, and they had been doing that from the get-go. So that didn't quite go into play. Now we are trying to, like I said before, to add more kind of quality harnesses by doing continuous integration, but we're not going to have a continuous integration to begin with, start working on unit tests. We're going to have our build verification systems roll on system verification tests. So creating something that can run up a lot of Eve clients and test a lot of different functionalities. Now, those tests need to be created as well, but we just haven't gotten to that point yet.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Hey, one more thing. Can I ask you to introduce yourself? I'm supposed to ask you to introduce yourself.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
My name is Kei Kim. I'm working for Entropsoft, PC online MMO developer in South Korea. Yeah.
Thank you so
very
much. Thank you. Ha. Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, I'll just give you your magazine later.
Go
ahead.
Only one copy of that? Or? My name's Adam Tizell, and I work for Disney Online Studios Canada Club Penguin. And I have a question. You appeared to have a project management tool up there on one of your earlier slides. So I was just wondering what you use and how effective it is amongst your international teams and interdisciplinary teams, like from your software types to your creative types.
Right. Could you maybe drop the bass a little bit and turn up the mid-range? So thank you. So I can... Okay, so the tool that you saw there is called Handsoft, and it's widely used in the game industry for doing agile development. And we use it a lot for our kind of backlog management. It has a great tool for managing hierarchical backlogs and managing releases. So you can identify releases and pull stories from the backlog straight into sprints that are defined on the release. Now, after that, it is up to each team to organize how they will work. And most of the teams will choose not to use Handsoft for their daily scrum and stuff like that. They will put up tasks and posters and stuff like that, physical burn downs. They don't even have a requirement to fill in Handsoft the task as well. Some teams do it specifically if they're working with teams from abroad, but it is enough just to commit the stories to the sprints, and then you can do whatever you want. Right. But in terms of, this is, some teams will of course choose to use Handsoft for their sprint execution as well. And it's, like I said, it's all over the place, and each team can choose what they do, and we have this tool, they can use it. There hasn't been a lot of kind of resistance from a specific group. Mainly, maybe in art production, we will use the kind of pipeline tools and workflow tools more than doing like Scrum walls. But that's changing a lot with the introduction of Kanban walls. So we have maybe split Kanban walls with Scrum walls for hybrid teams.
Flexibility is the watchword.
What's that?
Flexibility is the watchword, I guess.
Right, yeah. Thanks.
That was a great talk. Really enjoyed listening to it. So thank you for doing this. My name is Mark Merrill. I'm the president of Riot Games out of Los Angeles. And I have a bunch of questions for you if you don't.
Okay. Do you want to send me an email maybe?
well, I think these will potentially be helpful for everybody. So feel free to cut me off if
All right.
you want me to. But how do you guys forecast and plan your velocity for your teams?
How do we forecast or plan?
Forecast and plan your velocity. So essentially, if teams, do you look at historical performance of the teams and then use that for the roadmap going forward to project the amount of features you'll be completing? Okay, so for the most part, we would use empirical data. So if we have a team that has some track record, we will use that data. But we would then, try to be smart and maybe take the median of history and figure out what their kind of average lowest velocity is and what their average highest velocity is, and then add that to the must-go prioritization and make sure that they're not adding more to the must-have functionality than their average low velocity, and so what goes in between is the could-haves and should-haves. Now, if we don't have historical velocity, we will guesstimate the velocity. They will come up with a number and saying, well, the velocity is probably going to be 13, okay? But then we require them also to have that range, create a guesstimate of a range. What is your guesstimated highest and what is your guesstimated lowest? And then
at the same time ensure that the must-have functionality is under the lower bar of it.
Gotcha. Okay, great. And then how do you guys do feature estimations? And do you do feature estimation sessions?
Right.
And do you use hours or points, or what's your metric there?
Again, it is also varies between projects and teams. Most of the teams are using story points, and most of the teams do planning poker. It is perfectly okay for one team to use story points and one team to use ideal days within the same product, because in the end it's apples and oranges. But it's also apples and oranges when you do ideal days and when you do story points.
Right.
So if you look at these burn down charts, some of them had really huge columns and some of them had low for that exact same reason. One point doesn't necessarily mean the same in another.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. And then how do you guys structure your teams? Are they cross-functional, goal-oriented teams or feature-oriented teams?
Yeah. So on our Othello plan there, you maybe saw the legend. We have what's called a feature team, which is a fully cross-functional team capable of doing a feature implementation without having a lot of interdependencies. Then we have component teams, and they are doing components to the product, like those will often be tools or specific systems or maybe core functionality. And then we have graphics teams, which are very engineering driven, but they're all cross-functional. They will always have at least engineering and QA. Most of them have engineering, QA, and game design, and some of them have, if you go to a level creation team, they will have, level designers and concept artists and environmental artists. And then we have art teams, and art teams are usually just art disciplinary and with a producer.
Great. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Chris Karras from Rosetta Stone. You presented a lot of really good, solid, agile practices, and it's really impressive the way that you guys were able to scale it up to such a multi-team environment. I was wondering, though, which of the agile practices did you adopt specifically because the teams were distributed globally? And if those teams had been located in the same country or in the same facility, would you change or adapt the process in any way or trim it back in any way?
Well, we would save a lot of money on video conferencing equipment, that's for sure. I don't think there's anything specific. I mean, when we started, we really tried to go as much by the book as we could, right? And then we would just evolve the process over time. So this is a lot based on Dean Leffingwell's scaling software agility, and as you can see from that slide, if we would have done this locally, we would probably have done it exactly the same. And there are products that are almost all locally, and they work exactly the same. There's nothing really that comes to mind immediately.
So most of the practices that you presented are you consider those just scaling Scrum up to a big multi-team environment? And
Absolutely. It's just, there are some things. I mean, so when you scale, you need to have a Scrum of Scrums, but that's fairly well documented. You also need to provide a lot of organization to the self-organization. So there is a lot of facilitation that happens with extra producers. We have 3 associate producers helping with the production of Eve. That's often documented as project managers to subsidize a Scrum process. And then, of course, we have these super product owners that are maintaining a very high-level backlog, but still based on return of investment priorities rather than feature priorities, but they have to kind of enable that vision to funnel down and maintain that vision throughout the teams. So those are some things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great talk. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Song from South Korea. I'm a project manager.
Could you speak a little bit?
Yeah, I have a simple question. I noticed that you have product owner retrospective, and this is something that I plan to do, but it's just not happening in my organization. Could you share some interesting insights? What came off of that?
Yeah, so the product owner retrospectives,
yes,
specifically. The product owner retrospectives will usually end up resulting into how the release planning process works. And based on the kind of game design process that we are running, the releases, they happen right after each other. And so for that specific product, for instance, we started doing releases and then a week break and then another release and then a week break, and then we moved to doing 3-day breaks, and now we're just doing 2 Right? We finish on Wednesday and then we release plan the next Monday. So there's a lot of, and that game design process describes that fairly well, how you go from, at the same time as you are working to finish your current release, how you are defining the product backlog based on game design for the next release and how that overlaps. And to get that into place so that it would work took 3-4 releases, kind of, yeah. And so the product owners are usually dealing with stuff in that kind of release context and how to make that work more seamlessly, rather than anything specific with the process and or environment. Those things usually come up in maybe the Scrum Master retrospectives.
Just to follow up, how do you divide those product owners' responsibilities, by feature or?
Yeah, it's usually by feature or by component. Or product owner might be responsible for 2 features if they are smaller, but we will usually try to fit it so that the product and the team can take full ownership of a feature.
All right, thank you very much.
Please speak up.
Hi, Chris Passley from Break Media. I was just curious, how important do you think it is for every single person in this huge team that you have to be fully versed in like the Scrum procedures and the philosophy behind it, or is it enough just to have them involved in the planning and involved in the sprints and kind of basically know the day-to-day workings, or does everyone need to have a comprehensive knowledge of the process?
Well, the more we have, the better, right? So there's nothing better when a team member comes and contents something that the Scrum Master is saying, right? So, and we have trained a lot of people to be certified Scrum Masters that are working just on teams, and we do a fair amount of training. We had going from this last release to the next release, we did a Scrum refresher for all Scrum teams working on Eve, for example. And so the more the people that are working on the process know about the process and kind of the underlying principles and practices behind it, the better. But like you say, it's not essential. We can drive this forward by just having Scrum Masters know about Scrum and try to educate around them. But as more they know, the better.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's James. I'm from Games Lab in Australia, producer. Just got a question in regards to multiple projects. So you've got Eve, which is got legacy code for creating updates, so you can use Agile in that sense. When you're creating these new games that you're creating from scratch, do you find that you should use the waterfall method to get them going, then fall into Agile, or can you go Agile from the start in regards to brand new games that aren't sort of out there at the moment and just creating updates for? What's your thoughts on that?
Could you?
Sorry, it's 2.
Yeah. So what's the question?
Okay. No, it was in regards to. So you've got Eve, you're creating updates using Agile,
right.
And that's fine, releases and so forth. But when you're creating these brand new games from scratch, do you find Agile is still effective, or do you need to have that initial waterfall phase to essentially get the game up and running and then be creating releases from that point in Agile?
Yeah, that's a very valid point. And for all of these current efforts we are running, they are built on known technology. So we are utilizing, like I mentioned briefly before, that we have this core technology platform. And so our upcoming MMO is built on that same core technology platform and the same architectural runway, so that we do have the ability for teams to just go and make games. And for our console project, Dust 514, if you followed the games industry news releases in this week, it was announced that we've licensed the Unreal Engine 3 platform to do that. So we have these underlying platforms to work on.
Just a follow-up for that, in regards to then your ability to use teams across different projects, that's really only effective in that sense, really, isn't it? If you've got teams that are used to using a certain type of legacy or back-end, that they're able to cross from, say, your new MMO to Eve and back and forth like you were showing in your demonstration then. That's really only effective in that point, I guess. It would be harder for 2 completely different, platform.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, it's not an easy transition for a guy that's optimizing PS3 code to come work and yeah, that's absolutely correct. And we don't do that currently. But remember, Dust 5.14 is not only an FPS console game, it's also a massively multiplayer game that connects into our current massively multiplayer online role-playing game. So it does share a lot of that technology as well.
Okay, great talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we are 1 minute from being out of time, so unless anybody has a question right at the... Oh. Yes, I was just about to get to that. Okay, so here is my contact information. Since you were kind enough to attend this lecture, I invite you all to send me an email if you have any further questions. Additionally, you should write down the blog page over there. I woke up this morning and decided to create a blog, and so I did. And so there's a blog there with one blog post on it, and there will be more interesting blog posts in the future on this kind of similar subjects. And in addition to that, we have a booth here at GDC down in the Career Pavilion. And if you remember the first slide that kind of showed the kind of employee growth, we are looking to go from current 483 to 650 in this year. So if you are looking for a job, we are actively hiring. It's fun to work in a global agile game development organization. Yes, and in 30 minutes there will be an open bar in our booth at the pavilion. Okay, that's it. Thank you so very much.